Alrighty, let's see, plus 90, enter. Bananas. That's right, I said bananas. Not because I'm going to eat any, though I am kind of hungry, but because this is all just for $550. That's right, today I'm going to be showing you putting together a $550 budget gaming build. Now I know in my last video I said you can make a gaming PC for $500, but that's because I went just a little frugal on some things here. You don't need this big of a power supply, you don't need a water cooler, you can go with an air cooler instead for your CPU. But everything else, kind of mandatory. But if you downgrade those other components, you'll get something under $500. Okay, moving on. The pieces that you're gonna need, or should I say ingredients, for your gaming PC a la Rick. For the brains of the operation, I went with the AMD APU. This is the A10-7870 Godavari APU from AMD, and this is basically going to be my CPU and graphics card all in one. Now because I went with that, I had to go with some high-speed memory here from G-Skill. This is the Aries 8 gig kit. These are going to be running at 2133 megahertz, so with an XMP profile, this is going to make or break your gaming experience with an APU. So for cooling that APU, I went with this 120V side-on from Cooler Master. This is an all-in-one liquid cooler, so as to keep that APU all nice and cool, because we're going to be running not only general workloads off the processors, but we're also going to be gaming off of it. So keeping it cool is definitely in your benefit. Holding all this together is going to be the MITX motherboard from Gigabyte. This is the F2A88XN Wi-Fi compatible motherboard. Went with a Western Digital green 1 terabyte hard drive, so as to get that mass storage out of the way. And one upgrade that you can look for further on into the future is maybe getting a solid state drive, or just bumping up to a Western Digital Black, where you can still get that that mass storage but at a higher speed. Of course, you can see that we went with the Corsair 250D MITX case as well. And powering everything is going to be actually something that I'm pretty sure is no longer sold, but I had lying around. This is Kingwin's Laser 850 watt power supply. And like I said, I just had one laying around. I don't know if you'll find one anywhere, but I went a little frugal with this one. You don't need 850 watts to power this at all. You would probably only need, I'd say, 500 watts for a build like this. So we got all those components laid out. Now all we need are our tools. And for putting a computer together, it's actually rather simple, especially one such as this, where we're not going to do any water cooling or any super fancy anything like that. All you need is a Phillips head screwdriver. That's it. But I would suggest a couple other things, maybe some wire cutters, so you can clean up any sort of like zip ties or any other things that are sticking out. Needle nose pliers in case you lose a screw in a hard to reach place. Those always help. A knife or box cutter or scissors or anything to get all these boxes open. And a flashlight, so you can find everything in there. But let's get to it. So what I've done here is that I've just taken our little MITX motherboard out of the box and put it on top of its own box. This is a great substitute in case you don't have an anti-static mat to lay everything out on. This works as a great platform for installing like your RAM and CPU and all that stuff. So what I'm going to show you actually is installing that APU that I showed you earlier. Well, what we're going to do to get ready for it is we're just going to lift this retention arm off to the side a little bit there and pull it up all the way up until it hits this plastic backing back there. That's when it's fully unlocked. Now the socket plate is actually what moves around, so you have to have this all the way back to make sure it's all the way unlocked. And then we're going to have our APU here, and to line this up, the best way to do so is there's going to be a little gold triangle at the corner of your APU, CPU, whatever. And there's also going to be a little corner or a little triangle etched out on your socket. So all you have to do is you have to line that up. Now, because AMD has their pins out on the bottom of their APUs here, you have to be careful not to bend any of them. So we're just going to be gentle, and we're just going to set this right in there. If it goes, there it goes. Don't try and force it at all. Just kind of let it drop in there. Give it a little bit of a wiggle once it's in. And then when we're going to drop this retention arm, remember, off to the side a little bit. And now it's locked in place. You can pull up on it and it's not going to move. And that's installing your APU. Now, RAM is going to be very easy as well. I've already pulled these tabs back, but they will come installed like this. So all you gotta do is you just gotta pull each of these little tabs back. You're gonna get your RAM sticks, and you're just gonna line up this little divider that you have in the RAM slots with this little slot that you have at the bottom of your stick. So line it up, push firmly, and the clips should close themselves. So we'll do the same thing with the other one now. Just make sure it's all lined up there. Firmly. And now the RAM is installed. Now the reason we're pre-assembling all this is we're going to do something called a post-test. You don't want to spend all that time working on your computer, getting it all put together into the case and all wired up, all nice and fancy, and find out something in your components does not work. So we do something that is called a post-test, where we're going to basically assemble the components on the outside of the case and just give it a test, make sure it does something called a post, which is basically like a working screen on your monitor. So to do a post test, we need a cooler, and luckily those APUs from AMD, they come with a stock heatsink. You don't want to really muck around with that all-in-one liquid cooler just yet, because that requires a little bit more prep to get into. This one's a bit easier. All you really got to do is you just got to light up one side here, get it hooked onto the side of the socket, let it fall down, or scoot it over a little bit. There. Let it just sit there on top of the CPU there. And then we're going to make sure this other side is clipped into the socket, and that one just takes a little bit of force, and there. Now it's all clipped in. All you got to do is just pull back on this lever here, all the way back until it's settled. Plug this in right here, and your stock heatsink is all plugged in. Now let's move on to the post test. So for the post test, all we really need is going to be the power supply, and we have that plugged into the wall right now, so that's all ready. We need a monitor with the cable to the monitor, and then we're going to need a keyboard, which I have laying for me right down here. So we just need to get this all plugged in now. So we're going to take our 24 pin plug, and we're just going to plug it in onto the side of the motherboard here into that 24-pin slot. Oop. There we go. There. 24-pin all plugged in. Now we just need to find that CPU pin, which is actually on the other side over by the PCI Express slot. Not exactly sure why it's way over there, but it is. So we're just going to line that up, and we're just going to get that all plugged in right there. So it's a 4-pin, not an 8-pin. So now we're going to take this, we're going to plug this into our monitor now with using our HDMI slot built into the motherboard. There we go. And take our keyboard. That's the wrong cable. Take our keyboard, plug it into one of those USB slots back here. Then we're going to take something metallic. I'm going to use my knife here, and we're just going to bridge the power connector, which will be laid out for you inside of the user's manual of the motherboard, so you'll know exactly where that is, making sure your monitor is on and your power supply is on. We're just going to bridge that little gap there, and away it goes. So now we're just going to see if this is going to post for us today. And it's going to enter BIOS setup utility, okay. And yes, here we go. You have basic functionality for your components. That basically means that this is, your post test is all passed and ready to go. Now we can throw all this stuff inside the case, make it look all pretty, maybe throw some LEDs in there. So let's get that started. Okay, so I find it best to work in a case when it's pretty much all taken apart. So we'll just do that real quick for her. Make sure to set these side panels off to a safe place, especially the ones with the window. You don't want that getting all scratched up or anything like that. So we'll just take off all these side panels here. And then the top panel, that just slides off like so. Should work. So now all we got is this nice open case. Let's make it a whole lot easier to work with. And get your screw box out of the way. And then we'll just try and get all these cables out of the way. So you just have them all sticking out everywhere. It just makes the workspace a whole lot easier to work with in terms of getting prepped for a build. Just make sure none of that stuff gets in your way. So these are going to be our posts right here. You're going to see them here, 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 and there. Those are going to be the posts that we're going to have the motherboard sticking to our case. So all we got to do is first we got to install our I/O shield. The I/O shield is what's going to be going back here, and that came in our motherboard bag. This will always come with your motherboard. There we go. And that's just going to look just like that. So we're going to insert this from the inside, get it all lined up, and then you're just going to push in each corner, give it a nice, whoops, there we go. Just give it a nice push until you hear a nice little pop there. Helps to line everything up. Pop. 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 Oh, why isn't this working? There it goes. So just make sure it's all popped in there. You got it all the way around. It's all sticking out just a little bit. And that's going to be your I/O shield there. And that's just going to be for all of your little ports on the back of your motherboard here, so that we can get this installed, making sure to remove that stock cooler that we installed for the post test. So that's just going to be easy. We're just going to pull back on this lever up here and give myself a static free workspace here. Just going to push down on one side, get this clip off. Then we're just going to give it a bit of a wiggle, because those stock coolers come with a little bit of that heat paste on there. There's that thermal compound to make sure it spreads the heat evenly over your copper block. So we're just going to set that off to the side, upside down preferably. And so to get off any of this residual paste, I would recommend some isopropyl alcohol, which I have some right down here. 91% works well. So getting to that cleaning now, we have our alcohol, we have our microfiber cloth. You don't want to use toilet paper or any sort of like paper towel, fibrous materials. You don't want to do that, because then you'll leave fibers on there, which will ruin the heat dissipation, which ruins basically all that quality heat spreading that is built into these coolers. So I'm just giving this a rub down here with that wet part of the rag that I used. Now I'm just gonna maybe just give it a little bit of a rub with the dry end. So now that's all clean. Now we get to install this right into the case. Moving stuff off to the side. Having a large work area really helps. So kitchen counters, kitchen tables, really large desks, all this stuff helps for building a computer in a way that you can't imagine. So I'm just going to be lowering this in, and we're just going to line this up, make sure it's all lined up with your I/O shield that we installed earlier. And all you're going to do is you're just going to put all those little components and all those little headers, and you're just going to stick those right through that little I/O shield until it's on those posts. There we go. Maybe. Almost. There. So because this has a foam I/O shield, this is going to require a little bit of work here. So you're just going to have to keep this pushed forward, keeping that foam compressed on that I/O shield. That's how that's going to work, apparently. I'm going to go to those screws that came with our case. We're just going to drop those into those holes there, making sure to get this all screwed in. I'm just going to work at this back end first, so I don't have to hold this motherboard constantly anymore. One. And when you're tightening these, you don't want to tighten them all the way until you get all the screws installed. Once all the screws are installed, that is when you will go for the full tighten. And you don't really want to torque it down. Remember, all these components are plugged into this motherboard. You don't want any cracks running through it. So just tight enough that it's not going to go anywhere. So we have those two installed. Now it should make our other two screws just a little bit easier to get to. Just go ahead and drop that screw in there. And drop the other screw in here. This is where that needle nose pliers will come in handy should you drop one of these tiny screws. There are a bunch of little cracks and corners in the case that you don't necessarily think you'll be able to reach with your fingers. So that won't help a whole lot. There we go. And the last one. There we go. Now we have a fully installed motherboard. Now we can just tighten these down, being careful not to tighten them too much, but just enough. So coming up with an all-in-one liquid cooler, you get a nice big instruction manual that you have to study carefully and follow in minute detail to make sure everything works out perfectly, for the most part. So some unsavory words were just said. I was working on the back plate of this cooler for the all-in-one liquid cooler that we're going to be using, and as I was working on this, I realized what I was working on. This is the back plate, and because we don't have an upward oriented motherboard, there's no way for me to get to the back plate without pulling out the motherboard. So yeah, now we gotta undo all those screws that we just spent time putting in. First, we're going to assemble this back plate in the AMD position. What's nice is that AMD tends to keep all their sockets the same size, unlike Intel where you have 1150, 1151, 1155, whatever. They all change sizes. AMD kind of stays the same, so their mounting is pretty easy, straightforward. But now what we got to do is we got to take this motherboard back out and take off that back plate that's pre-installed on the motherboard. So as you can see, I have the motherboard back out of the case and back onto its box. Now getting that back plate off, of course I'm talking about this thing back here. Getting that back plate off is going to be fairly simple. With your Phillips head screwdriver, you're just going to unscrew these 4 screws on the outside here. It's going to get rid of these plastic brackets and that metal back plate on the back. And we're just going to replace it with this right here, which I have already set up for our AMD mounting. So that's going to get this going. One potato, 2 potato, 3 potato, 4, 5 potato, 6 potato, 7 potato more. Sorry you guys have to put up with my singing. Alright, screws undone. Just pull up on those brackets, screws and all. And we're going to pull off that back plate there. I wonder. Let's see. Nope, those are already threaded. Alright, so you can't keep the back plate like I was hoping you could. Instead, you're just going to run this right through here. So that's through all those holes back here. So line it up, run it all the way through. So now we have this installed. So as we can see, motherboard is now firmly back in place where it's supposed to be. But something that I noticed, and there's always going to be a complication or two when making a computer, I assure you. This case comes with 2 fans, right? You got fan 1 up here, fan 2 up at the front. This motherboard has 2 fan headers. One here and one here. We need one more fan header for our all-in-one liquid cooling loop. Yeah, so I did some digging through my stuff, and I fortunately have a PWM fan splitter by BitPhoenix. This is a nice red sleeved, nice looking cable that will turn 1 plug into 3. Now what that means is that that one plug that had PWM fan control is going to distribute the same voltage to all 3 fans. So I will no longer have individual control of any of those fans that I would have plugged into this cable, but I will not be short of fan headers on my motherboard. So that will have to be used. Next thing I would suggest doing would be planning out where you're going to be having your cooling. As a matter of fact, I am going to opt to keep this fan right here, and then I'm going to have the all-in-one liquid cooler next to it, which you can kind of see it right here, has a nice empty spot for it. It'll make for what I think a cleaner run of the tubes passing underneath this drive cage and all the way over to that corner. I will also put it in an exhaust format, so it's going to be taking this air in this area and pushing it out along with this fan. This fan will also be doing the same thing. And then we'll have this fan on intake only. So this is going to be pulling that air in through the front. It's going to have little gaps on that on the side of that front plate there to pull in all the air, and it has a nice fan filter to stop dust from getting in. But I think the next step is going to be to install that power supply now. Moving on to that power supply, as we can see, this is actually what is called a semi-modular power supply. Semi-modular means that it will have some cables that are mandatorily connected to the unit. Full modular means that these cables, such as the 24 pin and the CPU connector, will also be optional. But it's semi-modular, so those have to go in. We'll just loop them out the side here so we can get them out of the way. Now we're going to orient it so that the intake fan for the power supply is facing down, because this case has a vent at the bottom of it that is also has a dust filter in. Get this wiggle inside a little bit here. Maybe. Oh, there it goes. Alright. And then we got that little plate, mounting plate. I'll just have this stick out a little bit so I can make sure everything lines up. And then we will begin installing our mounting screws here, 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 and here. And then we'll attach the thumb screws to this gate here and here. And now we have that power supply squared away. We're going to move on to that hard drive next. Now some of you might be wondering why I'm not doing the CPU cooler right now. I feel I will be doing that one close to last. Personally, because the plastic tubes that are used for the cooling loop tend to be a bit of an obstruction. They're very rigid and very much in the way. So these are going to be those excuse me, these are going to be those flex bay mounting systems for your hard drive. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to line up these holes here, slide in one side, make sure it's all in there properly, sort of bend it open a bit, get one in, get the other in, and there we go. Now it's mounted, and you got to make sure that your plugs are going into the case. You don't want to be routing cables all the way out to the back over here. So we got that, and we just slide that back in, and bingo, bango, bongo. There we go. I have a feeling I'm going to regret putting this gate back on, but I'm going to do it anyways. Alright, so something that I did not mention in the parts list is going to be this optical drive that I'm going to be installing in here. I did neglect to mention that this build is actually designed with someone in mind. And so if you're curious about installing an optical drive, there's a front faceplate that will normally be right here. You can uninstall this by either taking off the front plate or the top plate or the side plate and get behind it. There's going to be these two tabs that you'll squeeze together and it'll pop right out. So we just slid this drive in here. There's going to be a toolless mounting clip at the top right about here. So you just got to make sure that your screws for mounting the optical drive align with this, and should just clip right down like so. So now we have a nice optical drive that is kind of an off black, but black nonetheless. Ah! I have to say, least favorite part about building computers will probably have to be wiring. Wiring is a bit of a headache. The only thing that is actually correct about wiring is where you plug it in, and the rest is just subjective, like how you run your wires and all that. So what I usually like to do is I'll plug these cables in. What I'm doing is I'm plugging in the front I/O, so the power switch, reset switch, hard drive activity light, that sort of stuff. I'll plug that in first, and then I'll see how much room I have to play with these cables. Like if I can hide them all the way in the back of the case, if I could curl them underneath the motherboard somehow. So what I'll usually do is I will usually run my cable, I will plug my cables in first and then play around with cable managing them a little bit. But I'll never finalize any of my cable management until absolutely everything is plugged in. Pretty much that point where I'm about to turn on that computer that is going to be the last thing I check, or the last thing I do is fasten all those zip ties, those twist ties and all that stuff. Looks to me though, we have enough of a gap that we might even actually be able to run cables underneath the motherboard as well. That'll do well also for cable management. So we'll just have to see, play with it, work as we go. So a bit of a progress update on our cabling so far. What I've done is I've taken those two fans and I've plugged them into this fan splitter that I have. I've taken the CPU power and I've run it along this side here using the two tie downs that are pre-installed to tie it down and to curve it up and over this PCI Express slot that we're not going to be using. And as far as the power button, reset button, I traced it around here underneath the motherboard over to this side so as to keep the cables all neat and tidy. And likewise, I have taken the front audio ports, also run them over, or run them underneath the motherboard, so they went this way, up and over to right about there. I took the USB 3 port, I ran along this top rail up here so I can fit my fans underneath it, and then I dropped it down right onto the motherboard right there. And so now all we gotta do is we gotta connect those SATA ports to our hard drive and our optical drive, and then we gotta provide SATA power from our power supply to both those components. And then it'll be finally time for that CPU cooler. So I have everything plugged in now, but I just wanted to show you guys a little something that I found here when I was plugging in my two SATA cables right here. I was able to run them over here, and actually there's this nice little spot that'll run along the side and underneath the fan here, so you can have a nice little hideaway for your SATA cables here, maybe even your USB 3.0 if you might be able to fit that through that little hole. But you can just run it over here. I ran it to the hard drive, and I ran another one up to this optical drive up here. I have all the SATA powers all plugged in, and I had to unplug our 24-pin connector so I can get our liquid cooler all installed now. But we're going to need to do something for that first, and that is we're going to apply our thermal compound to our APU here. Now there's only one real tip that I can show you guys for this, and that is it's just the amount that we're going to be using. So we're just going to take it, we're going to take our applicator, and we're just going to squeeze some out on here. I like to do about that much. A lot of people will say an uncooked grain of rice. And let's see if I can get this closer for you guys. So I like to use about that much thermal compound. That'll give me a good even spread, especially when I tighten that cooling heatsink all the way down on there. It'll spread out nicely. Let's see, what's the best way we can do this? How about we cue up some music while I try and figure this out? I'll get some playing for myself as well. So I figured something out there. To install this fan and radiator combo in the spot that I want, I'm going to have to actually remove this 120mm fan that I have already installed at the top here. That's what the screwdriver's for though, right? So as you can see, not only have I changed my shirt, but I've got that radiator in there. And I tell you, I had to bang my head on the desk a few times because of all the stuff that I had to move to get this in there. And I thought the plastic hard tubing that comes with it was going to be the issue, is more of my own wiring. Something like that. But I was able to get it in, and I noticed that when you have a 120mm radiator installed in this side slot, you do not have room to mount a 120mm fan using the holes that they have planned out. This is the smallest form factor radiator that I know of for 120mm all-in-one setup. So I kind of had to get a little creative. Yeah. So I got this fan all mounted as well, and I got everything all plugged in. So we have all of our components all plugged in. We have all those SATA ports, or two SATA ports being used, front switches, front audio, USB 3, all that stuff all plugged in. Motherboards all plugged in. And what's this? There's a Molex connector. Nothing I showed you guys has Molex in it. Well, that is because I decided I was going to bling this out a little bit by using BitPhoenix LED lighting strips. These are going to be, the ones that I used are the 12cm blues, so they're just rather short. And actually, bring one up to the camera for you guys here. I have one installed just across the top, so right about here. And then I also have one mounted on top of this front fan here, just right over the top. The key to good case lighting is indirect lighting. You don't want to see it when it's turned on. Not directly, at least. So with that case window up here, it's going to be just barely out of view. And with this strip up here, it's going to cause a glow to emit around this front plate here. So I get this mounted. So it should just cause a glow to emit around this plate where the air is going to be coming in for the fan. Give it a nice bit of a aesthetic, blue aesthetic there. I went with blue because not only is the LED on our water pump up here, there's a blue LED there, and I also have the blue memory sticks. So I thought the blue theme stuck really well with that. So now I'm just going to start some B-roll for you guys right about now. So in summary, I think what we built here today is a great startup gaming computer. We have that extra PCI Express slot to expand even further to get something all the way up to a Titan X or a 980 Ti or a Fury X. We can throw that right in there and it'll be right at home. You can even upgrade the SSD to make boot times near instantaneous. Any sort of upgrade you can perform with a regular sized computer can be performed within this very roomy small form factor case, which I'm actually quite surprised was able to take everything that I threw in there, considering that the 120mm didn't really fit along with the 120mm fan. You can fit a 240mm, I have confirmed this, you can fit a 240mm radiator for those larger all-in-one liquid coolings. But I think it's about time I wrap this up for you guys. I had a whole lot of fun building this. I always have fun building computers. This is kind of why I have my channel up and running now. Actually, I have to have to reveal this now, but this is actually built with a specific person in mind. This is a birthday present for my future brother-in-law, Bobby Wright. He's gonna enjoy this one. Well, just to sign off for you guys, remember, use those buttons that the great YouTube gave us, or write a comment down below. Hopefully you liked it. Maybe you can let me know if you didn't, what I can improve on, maybe what I missed for some of those more experienced builders. I hope this causes you guys to maybe go out and build your own computer. There's nothing like building your own computer. Once you put it all together, you have a whole lot more pride in your projects. I mean, this is something that you did. Well, anyways guys, thanks for tuning in. This is Giga Hertz TV. Hope to see you guys in the next video.